Macbeth, for iHearShakespeare. Composed in 1606 as an entertainment for King James I of England, who also held the title of King James VI of Scotland, Macbeth is considered the last of Shakespeare's great tragedies, coming after Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear. Shakespeare was not unaccustomed to flattering the monarchy, for when Elizabeth I held the crown, Shakespeare included many references in his plays to the Queen, as well as her relatives, to their general glory. Such is the case in Macbeth, when Shakespeare draws a flattering portrait of Banquo, who was thought to be an ancestor of James. It is also likely that Shakespeare consciously drew parallels in the character of Macbeth, using the knowledge that James's cousin, Francis, the Earl of Bothwell, had been convicted by James I of treason for allegedly plotting with witches and employing infernal powers that threatened the king's life. For Macbeth conspires with the Weird Sisters and hires assassins in the play. What's more, James I was a patron of Shakespeare's company, which, to suit the newly crowned king, changed their name from the Lord Chamberlain's men to the King's Men. Shakespeare was familiar with James's fascination with monsters and black magic. Indeed, the king was the author of Daemonology, a book written in 1597 which Shakespeare would have been familiar with. Interest in monsters, witches, and the supernatural was very strong in the early 17th century. Indeed, in his 1620 Novum Organon, Francis Bacon advised that a compilation or particular natural history must be made of all monsters and prodigious births of nature, of everything in short which is new, rare, and unusual in nature. This should be done with a rigorous selection so as to be worthy of credit. With that sort of tone embedded within the cultural fabric of London, Shakespeare's play Macbeth was especially exciting as it begins with thunder and lightning in an unnamed barren wasteland where three witches are concluding their evening's rituals. However, before we move into the plot of Macbeth, there are two other important ideas that should be addressed. The first is the idea of equivocation, that is, an ambiguous way of speaking meant to avoid committing oneself one way or another. Due to religious intolerance and, in particular, the nature of the relationship between Catholics and Protestants, Londoners at that time were accustomed to equivocal language and employed it when needed so that they could be true to their faith without fear of persecution. The theory surrounding the meaning of the popular holiday song The 12 Days of Christmas, for example, is a product of the religious tensions of the time and has subsequently been claimed to serve as a sort of mnemonic device for the catechism of young children, among other arguments. Characters in Macbeth speak equivocally or point to the idea of equivocation in many instances. An early example occurs at the beginning of the play when the second witch says, "When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won," which suggests that the significance of the battle is at least twofold. Their chant-like speech is concluded with "fair is foul and foul is fair," which will be echoed with Macbeth's first words when he decrees, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." The second idea is that of prolepsis, which is defined as the representation or assumption of a future act or development as if presently existed or accomplished. Macbeth's compulsive imagination and inclination toward fantasy causes him to mentally live in the future and so exists in a constant stage of conflict. After Macbeth's initial encounter with the witches, he envisions himself on the throne and talks of possibilities and what-ifs, to the point of immobility until spurred into action by his wife. These ideas of equivocation and prolepsis are at the heart of the play, and are placed center stage in Macbeth's aside at Act 1, Scene 2, when the eponymous character states, "Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme." Now, let's begin with Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth, for iHearShakespeare. Act 1, Scene 1 begins, as I have noted, in an open place, as three witches are concluding their evening's rituals, thus setting the general tone of the play. Scene 2 introduces us to King Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain, and Lennox, among others, who learn from a captain how Macbeth courageously fought back the encroaching Norwegian army and brutally slaughtered the rebel MacDonald. We also meet Ross, who brings news that the Thane of Cawdor has betrayed King Duncan. Duncan orders the Thane of Cawdor to be executed and to transfer that title to Macbeth. The irony here is that, just as the former Thane of Cawdor betrayed King Duncan, so too will Macbeth, who now holds that title. Scene 3 takes us to a barren heath where the witches are meant to intercept Macbeth and Banquo on their return from battle. The witches greet Macbeth with three titles: as Thane of Glamis, which he held before his battle, Thane of Cawdor, which King Duncan will give him upon his return, and King Hereafter, which Macbeth will come to make happen himself. Since Macbeth appears unable to speak, Banquo asks the witches about his own fortune. In sequence they reply, "Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none." And shortly after the witch's prophecy and disappearance, Ross and Angus arrive and announce that, by the king's decree, Macbeth has earned the title of Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth's reply, "The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" furthers the idea of prolepsis in that the title of Thane of Cawdor will be given to Macbeth after the scheduled execution. Equivocation, too, is touched upon when Macbeth, speaking his ensuing monologue, says, "This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. Nothing is but what is not." Scene 4 takes us to Forres in Scotland, where King Duncan is wrapping up the fallout of the earlier battle. Execution is carried out on Cawdor, and Duncan dubs Malcolm Prince of Cumberland, which Macbeth perceives as an obstacle to the throne. In Scene 5, we meet Lady Macbeth in her castle at Inverness in the midst of reading a letter from her husband, which describes what happened when he and Banquo met the witches on the heath. Lady Macbeth believes that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness to pursue the most direct path that would lead to the crown, and so decides she must use her own words to remove any hesitation that would hold him back from the golden round, which is, of course, the crown. Fate seems to be playing into Lady Macbeth's hands when a messenger enters and delivers news that King Duncan is planning to visit her castle that very night. In a speech that sounds like a spell itself, Lady Macbeth invokes spirits to unsex her and fill her from the crown to the toe with direst cruelty. Macbeth enters, and again we are reminded of the theme of prolepsis when Lady Macbeth says, "Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant." The two speak briefly of Duncan's impending visit, and the scene concludes with Lady Macbeth instructing her husband to act normally, and she'll take care of the rest. Scene 6 brings Duncan, Banquo, and others to Macbeth's castle. Duncan and Banquo both comment on the pleasantness of the castle as Lady Macbeth makes them welcomed. Scene 7 takes us into the castle where Macbeth is contemplating how he may murder Duncan. Just as Lady Macbeth feared, her husband cannot find the resolve to commit murder, stating, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other side." In fact, Macbeth has decided they will proceed no further in this business. Here, Lady Macbeth chastises her husband for being unable to find the courage to create their future as a man should. Her words are compelling and, after articulating her plan, Macbeth concedes. Here concludes Act 1 of Macbeth for iHearShakespeare. At Act 2, Scene 1, the time is past midnight, yet Banquo finds it difficult to sleep in Macbeth's castle. Hearing someone approach, Banquo calls for his son, Fleance, to hand him a sword. Macbeth enters, and Banquo confesses that he has been thinking about the witches and the prophecy they unfolded. Macbeth declares that he has not been thinking of the witches, and urges Banquo and Fleance to go to bed. Alone, Macbeth begins his "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" soliloquy. As he is concluding his meditation, a bell rings, signaling his cue to go and kill Duncan. Scene 2 finds Lady Macbeth, emboldened by the wine she drank earlier, relishing the thought of bloodshed and describing how Macbeth must be about the business of killing Duncan. Macbeth enters, and Lady Macbeth explains that she would have done the deed herself had Duncan not resembled her father. Macbeth explains that he did kill Duncan, but that others awoke who requested him to say Amen at the end of their blessing, which he could not do. Instead, he could only hear a voice say, "Sleep no more. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." Lady Macbeth tries to calm her husband and remind him that there is still work to be done. When she sends him to wash the filthy witness from his hands, the blood she means, she sees that he has brought the daggers back with him. When he says he cannot return to the scene of the crime to return the daggers, she takes them back herself. A knocking begins that seems to wake the entire castle. Pitifully, Macbeth only wishes that the knocking would wake Duncan from death. Scene 3 takes our focus away from the murders and to some comic relief in the form of a porter who some critics claim is a character written in by some other playwright. The porter is the keeper of the gate to Macbeth's castle and, in a metaphorical sense, the keeper to the gates of hell. He fumbles with his keys and finally lets in Macduff and Lennox. Joined by Macbeth, the three remark on the uneasiness of the night. Macduff goes to wake King Duncan and returns with the horrific news that Duncan has been murdered. Macbeth simulates grief, leaves to verify what Macduff has reported, and kills the guards whom he will blame for the murder of Duncan. Macduff wakes everyone shouting, "Awake, awake, ring the alarm bell, murder and treason." Lady Macbeth enters just before Banquo and acts surprised and confused. Macbeth admits to killing the guards in his fury and describes how and why he did so. Lady Macbeth begins to swoon and is carried off. Duncan's two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, fearing the same fate as their father, flee, one to Ireland, one to England. Of course, by fleeing like they do, they also invoke suspicion of their guilt, which Macbeth will later point out. Scene 4 takes place outside the castle where an old man describes some recent evil omens to Ross. The day suddenly turned to night, a falcon was killed by an owl, and Duncan's horses went wild and ate each other. Macduff enters and explains that Macbeth has been named king and has gone to Scone for the ceremony. Beginning to fear and distrust Macbeth, Macduff refuses to attend the coronation. Here concludes Act 2 of Macbeth for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 3, Scene 1 begins at Forres, where Macbeth now resides as king. Banquo opens the scene by conveying his suspicions about Macbeth in soliloquy. "Thou hast it now, king, cawdor, glams, all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it." Now king and queen, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth enter. Macbeth prods Banquo with questions and requests that he join the royal couple for a feast. Banquo says he will join them but will go riding until supper time. Upon Banquo's departure, Macbeth admits that Banquo is a threat to his new kingship. Macbeth reflects on the witch's prophecy and surmises that he has committed murder and become king, all for the betterment of Banquo's children, for it is they who will become the future kings of Scotland. Macbeth calls forth two murderers who agree to kill Banquo and Fleance. In Scene 2, we find Lady Macbeth alone, longing to speak with her husband. Once he arrives, Macbeth articulates how aggressively his conscience is tormenting him. Lady Macbeth implores her husband to leave behind these useless thoughts, but he cannot. Concluding the scene, Macbeth echoes his wife's invocation of the night in a chant-like way which he realizes causes amazement and fear in Lady Macbeth. Scene 3 finds the two murderers joined by yet a third who says he came at Macbeth's request. During the scuffle that ensues, Banquo is killed, but Fleance escapes. Scene 4 brings us to the feast Macbeth promised earlier. He is in the midst of welcoming his guests when one of the murderers enters with the news that Banquo is killed but Fleance escaped. Macbeth becomes agitated, tries to compose himself, and mentions that the evening's feast would be complete if only Banquo were there. Invisible to everyone else, Banquo's ghost enters the room and sits at Macbeth's place. Macbeth cries out, "Which of you have done this?" Lady Macbeth tries to calm him and all the guests by saying that Macbeth is sometimes prone to momentary fits. The ghost exits. Macbeth regains his composure and says a second time that he wishes Banquo were present, at which point Banquo's ghost re-enters. Macbeth cries out, "Hence, horrible shadow, unreal mockery, hence!" and the ghost disappears. Lady Macbeth sends the guests away. Macbeth asks why Macduff did not join them that night. Lady Macbeth is unsure if Macduff was even invited. Macbeth concludes the scene, stating that he will go to the witches for consultation. Scene 5 introduces Hecate, a more powerful witch who chastises the other witches for not including her in their earlier dealings with Macbeth. In a song which many scholars believe to have been written by Thomas Middleton, Hecate is called away and the other witches exit. Scene 6 depicts Lennox and an unnamed lord discussing the situation at hand. Duncan and Banquo have been killed under suspicious circumstances. Malcolm has found support in the King of England, and Macduff has been exiled because he did not attend Macbeth's feast. Here concludes Act 3 of Macbeth for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 4, Scene 1 begins with the three witches around a boiling cauldron. They are preparing for Macbeth's arrival, but before he comes, Hecate appears and praises the witches' works. Another ghostly song is sung here, then Macbeth enters. Macbeth agrees to see visions directly from the witches' masters. The first of three apparitions appears, an armed head which tells Macbeth to beware Macduff. The second, a bloody child which states that none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. The third, a child wearing a crown and holding a tree in his hand, tells Macbeth that he will never be defeated till great Birnam Wood come to Dunsinane Hill, which is the site of the castle Macbeth now occupies. Greedy to know more, Macbeth demands the witches oblige his request. The witches lastly show a line of 8 kings, the last of whom holds a mirror. Banquo's ghost comes last and points to the 8 kings which represent his own heirs, and further indicates more in the reflection of the mirror. The witches attempt to cheer Macbeth with a dance and then disappear. Lennox enters and reports that Macduff has fled to England. Macbeth decides that he will slaughter Macduff's wife and children. Scene 2 finds Ross trying to comfort Lady Macduff due to the fact that her husband has fled without explanation. Ross exits and Lady Macduff banters with her son about the fact that he must get used to not having a father. A messenger next arrives to warn Lady Macduff to leave, but it is too late. The murderers arrive and kill her and her son. Scene 3 takes us to England, where Malcolm tests Macduff's loyalty to Scotland by asking a number of leading questions. When Macduff expresses grief for Scotland, Malcolm believes that Macduff can be trusted. Ross next brings news that Macduff's wife, children, and servants have been slaughtered by murderers hired by Macbeth. Macduff resolves to kill Macbeth. Here concludes Act 4 of Macbeth for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 5, Scene 1, we learn from a waiting gentlewoman that she has seen Lady Macbeth walking in her sleep and behaving strangely. The gentlewoman recounts her story to a doctor as Lady Macbeth enters and demonstrates the account herself. "Out, damned spot," says Lady Macbeth, as she rubs her hands together in hopes of removing the bloodstains that haunt her. The doctor bemoans the pity of her condition and then exits. Scene 2 takes us to the countryside near Dunsinane, where a group of Scottish rebels against Macbeth discuss the approach of the English army led by Malcolm, his uncle Seward, and Macduff. They plan to join forces with the English army at Birnam Wood near the castle at Dunsinane, where Macbeth has placed his troops. Scene 3 shows a confident Macbeth preparing for battle and remembering that no man that's born of woman shall e'er have power upon thee. A servant enters and informs Macbeth that there are some 10,000 soldiers outside readying to attack. Macbeth calls for assistance from Satan to help put his armor on. The doctor enters with news that Lady Macbeth's condition is born of the mind and that he cannot help. Still, Macbeth implores the doctor to cure her and then exits toward the opposing army. Scene 4 takes the action to Birnam Wood, where the Scottish rebel army has united with the English forces. Malcolm orders his troops to camouflage their movements and numbers by cutting down branches and walking behind them. Scene 5 finds Macbeth unshaken until he gets word that his wife is dead, which inspires his "tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow" monologue. A messenger next reports that Birnam Wood appears to be moving. This is, of course, the camouflaged soldiers. Macbeth suddenly fears the prophecy that the witches described earlier. Scene 6 shows Malcolm, Seward, and Macduff approaching the castle. In Scene 7, Macbeth slays young Seward, then flees. Malcolm and Seward remark how Macbeth's forces have turned against him. Scene 8 finds Macbeth himself face-to-face with Macduff. Confident, Macbeth fights heartily and relates that his is a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. Macduff responds, Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. Their fight leads them off stage, where Macbeth is slain. Scene 9 concludes the play with Seward learning of his son's valiant death as Macduff enters with Macbeth's head. Scottish lords proclaim Malcolm king, and the play ends. Here concludes Act 5 of Macbeth for I Hear Shakespeare.